Soon they arrived at the town in Dryall. Alex slowed to a stop near Kyle's house. Thomas and Percy eagerly awaited Kyle to come out, expecting him to be happy and full of joy now that he had a real Christmas sleigh bell. But to their confusion, Kyle looked very sad and downtrodden, as though he had lost his favorite baseball. Kyle? Why so blue? Metaphorically speaking. Aren't you happy that you're finally back home? And that you have a very special Christmas present from Santa? Percy asked. That's just it, Kyle said sadly. I lost it. I lost the silver bell from Santa Claus's sleigh. Kyle then showed Thomas and Percy the pocket he had put the bell in. When he put his hand in it, his fingers stuck out through a hole in the bottom. Both engines felt their hearts sink. Oh no, Kyle. We're so very sorry. It really was a special Christmas gift, Thomas said sadly. We really wish we could help you find it. We really do. But I guess, well... Percy wheezed steam weakly and sadly. As much as it broke Kyle's heart to lose the bell, he also didn't like seeing his two friends sad. Don't worry, Thomas and Percy. You know what they say sometimes. It's the thought that counts. And do you know what? I did get to come home with something just as special. My two best friends. My mother always said there's no greater gift than friendship. Thomas and Percy began to smile a little bit. She also said that sometimes it's the journey that is the best part. And I'm so glad you both were on this Christmas journey with me. If I had gone alone, even with the other children, it wouldn't have been much fun. Thank you, Thomas and Percy, for coming along on this magical adventure with me. I couldn't have asked for better best friends. Hearing this made Thomas and Percy feel a lot better. You're very welcome, Kyle, Thomas said. It was our pleasure. Yes, Percy added. It was an experience we will never forget. Ever. Kyle smiled. He knew he would always have good friends in Thomas and Percy. He went to his house's doorway, turned back, and waved goodbye. As Alec began to pull away, the conductor said something, but Kyle couldn't hear him. What? He yelled out. The conductor cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Merry Christmas! Farewell, Thomas and Percy. Merry Christmas, Alex said to the two tank engines. Merry Christmas, Alec! Thomas and Percy both cried out in unison. Then Alec, the Polar Express engine, gave a final loud blast from his whistle and sped away. Thomas and Percy looked back at Kyle. Kyle looked back at them and waved goodbye again. Merry Christmas, Kyle! Thomas and Percy said in unison. Merry Christmas, Thomas and Percy! See you two tomorrow! Kyle called back. Then Kyle disappeared into his house and closed the door. Thomas and Percy slowly and quietly backed down the shimmering silver tracks. Once they were out of town, the two engines felt their wheels realigning with the feel of normal Sodor rails. Both engines heaved a big sigh of relief. Now they were truly home. They both puffed wearily back to Timothy's sheds. Edward Henry, Gordon, James, Toby, and Emily were still in their berths sound asleep. They hadn't even noticed the 2 tank engines had been gone. Thomas and Percy backed into the same berth together. They were so sleepy that no sooner had they stopped moving, they instantly fell fast asleep. Before they knew it, it was Christmas morning. The sun shone brightly in a clear and cloudless sky. Snow covered the ground. A white Christmas. Emily was the first engine to awaken. Toot toot! Rise and shine, everyone! It's officially Christmas Day, and Santa Claus has been here. The engine slowly awakened. Thomas and Percy, understandably and naturally, slower than usual. Good morning, everyone, Edward yawned. Good morning, Edward, Thomas yawned. Good morning, Percy yawned as well. Why the sleepy faces, you two? James teased. Stayed up all night waiting for Santa? No, James, Percy said. We just had a long night. A very long night. And by the way, Thomas added, we did see Santa Claus last night. Then suddenly Percy began talking very quickly and excitedly. And his reindeer, and his sleigh, and his elves, and the North Pole, and the Polar Express, and... You two probably must have been dreaming, Gordon grumbled groggily. Actually, Gordon, Thomas piped up, we did see all of those things. And besides, didn't you once say that it's impossible for 2 engines to have the same dream? Gordon was dumbfounded by Thomas's quick comeback. And anyway, we'll tell you all about it later on today. He looked out the window and saw... Thomas looked out the window. Right now, our drivers are coming to help us with our presents. And so they did. Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Toby, and Emily each got the same gift. Bags of the finest and cleanest Sodor coal. When they came to Thomas and Percy, they got a big surprise. It wasn't Sodor coal they got, but 2 big bags of the magical North Pole coal, and 2 tanks of North Pole water. But the biggest surprise of all was when the 2 tank engines both looked up at their funnels. Wrapped around them were 2 leather belts, and on the belts were shimmering silver bells, the same bells that were on the reindeer's harnesses. Fizzling fireboxes! Thomas gasped. We have our own bells now! Just like Kyle, Percy said happily, before frowning when he remembered something. Or at least he did. But don't you see? Thomas piped up. We can give one of these bells to Kyle. That's bound to make him feel a lot better. That's a wonderful idea, Thomas. Let's... But before both engines made any notion to leave, Bertie the bus suddenly pulled up next to the sheds. Oh, hello, Bertie. Merry Christmas. Hello, Thomas. Hello, Percy. Merry Christmas. I have someone here who wants to see you. And who should appear from Bertie than Kyle and his little sister Sarah? Kyle! Thomas and Percy cried out happily. Merry Christmas, Thomas and Percy! Kyle said, a big smile on his face. "You won't believe it! A Christmas miracle happened!" Kyle reached into his coat pocket and pulled out, to Thomas and Percy's surprise and joy, the same silver bell he had lost. "I don't believe it!" Thomas cried out. "I mean, I do, but how on earth did you ever get it back, Kyle?" Percy asked. "Santa found it," Kyle said happily. "And I found it hidden under our Christmas tree," piped up his little sister Sarah. "He left me this note." Kyle held the note up and read it out loud. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." Thomas and Percy looked at each other and smiled. "Mr. Claus!" "But when I shook the bell," Kyle continued, "and Sarah and I heard its magical sound, my parents hadn't heard a thing." "What? They hadn't?" Thomas asked, confused. "But why?" Percy also asked. Then, suddenly, as if they had both been hit by a lightning bolt, both engines immediately knew the answer. "It's probably because," Thomas began. "They don't really believe," Percy finished his sentence. "And it looks like you two got some bells of your own," Kyle said, pointing up at the two belts around the engine's funnels. Percy looked up at the bells around his funnel. "Oh, yeah! We do have some. I nearly forgot. This has got to be the best Christmas ever." "No doubt about it, Percy," Thomas agreed. James looked at the bells on the funnels and grew envious a little bit. "No fair! Thomas and Percy get silver bells and I don't. What gives?" Thomas looked at Percy and winked. "Sorry, James. You just had to have been there. But don't worry," Percy added. "There's always next year." But then he had an idea. Or maybe this year. Both tank engines giggled. The other engines were slightly confused. Then Thomas and Percy whispered something to their drivers. They nodded. Before the other engines knew it, each one had a single bell tied to their funnels by a red ribbon. "As it is Christmas Day," Thomas began, "it seems fair that we give you each a bell." "Because you're our friends," Percy added. "So it's only fitting that we share our gift with you all." "Why, thank you, Thomas and Percy," Edward said, gazing up at the silver bell around his funnel. This was very generous of you two." You're welcome, Edward. After all, it is the season of giving," Thomas said. "Merry Christmas, everyone!" Percy peeped with joy. "Merry Christmas!" everyone shouted. Then the engines blew their whistles and Bertie honked his horn. Whenever Kyle and the engines went that Merry Christmas Day, the silver bells rang for those who truly believed, while, sadly, those who didn't believe never heard a single sound, a single ring. Regardless, Thomas and Percy both knew deep within their boilers that they will never forget their Christmas adventure with their new friend, Alec the Polar Express. Woo! Woo! The end.